What's Carlisle been filling your head with? Tales of thieves with honor? Oaths ripe with falsehoods and broken promises? Wait a moment. Do I detect a hint of genuine avarice from this noble thief? Perhaps Carlisle and Brynjolf misjudged you and your true nature is no different than my own. Instead, you've chosen to fall over your own foolish code.
Hello and welcome back to Skypothesis. We are two brothers who believe Skyrim to be an infinitely replayable game. We created this channel to serve as a digital library for all of our best builds. It's time for another Anniversary Edition build, this time featuring a black-caped vigilante of the night, the Wolf's Shadow. This morally gray caped crusader moves unseen in the shadows, manipulates the battlefield, then strikes when the moment is right. He takes advantage of several Creation Club editions like Shadowrend, Umbra, and the Vigil Silver Hand Armor. As always, we take inspiration from all across the world of fantasy entertainment to make our builds, and this time we were particularly inspired to make a Batman-feeling character in the Elder Scrolls universe. His combat flow attempts to replicate the feel of the Batman games, and we think we got as close as possible in Skyrim. If you want to support the channel further, check out the links in the description for our merch shop and join our ever-growing Discord server. And now, without further ado, let's jump into how to build the Wolf's Shadow. Over 150 years before the events of Skyrim, the residents of rural Cyrodiil awoke one day to a bizarre and terrifying sight. A great floating island bearing a ruined city slowly traversed the sky, propelled by some unknown magical force. Wherever it traveled, it cast a cursed shadow, raising the dead and leaving inexplicable blights on the land. Entire towns were permanently cursed as it slowly made its way to the heart of Cyrodiil. The Wolf's Shadow's ancestor was the town bailiff of a small Colovian hamlet that was unfortunately placed right in the path of Umbriel's shadow. After that day, the dead wouldn't stay buried and no crops would grow. All were forced to abandon their home and become refugees in their own country. Ever since that fateful day, each generation has faced unfortunate calamity, financial destitution, or were taken to an early grave from sickness. A family curse, they called it, the Curse of Umbriel. 4 generations passed, and the young wolf was born. His Colovian mother died in childbirth, and his Nordic father turned to alcohol and substance abuse. He was never able to secure permanent work, and the pair were uprooted frequently. His childhood and teenage years were brutal, and as difficult as can be for homeless youth on the streets of the Imperial City. He begged outside of the arena and took any paying work, from cleaning gutters to shoveling manure. But the work just never lasted, and he always found himself back on the lowest rung of society's ladder. Though his life was hard, he did have some friends among his fellow beggars and sewer rats. He was a natural pickpocket, and he would frequently steal enough to feed everyone he knew. In spite of his efforts, his father never overcame his alcohol addiction and, in a night of inebriation, picked a fight with a city guard who cut him down without a thought. His body was unceremoniously tossed over the North Bridge out of the city. After fishing his father's body out of the bay and taking it to a priest of Arche, he swore an oath that he would end the family curse. He fabricated a new life story for himself and enlisted in the Imperial Legion at age 17. He had to do something, and military service seemed the only way out of poverty. He served as a legionnaire for over 15 years during a very difficult time in Cyrodiil. He watched many of his comrades fall during the infighting in Sheandal, but worst of all were the Skooma Wars in Breville. His unit was stationed there and constantly engaged in bloody conflict with the Skooma runners who, at this point, basically ran the town. It was a hopeless fight, with the Legion stretched thin due to the civil war in Hammerfell. But their orders from the Imperial City were to keep throwing bodies at the conflict until it ended. After one particularly successful raid, they managed to capture many of the Khajiit gang leaders, and the Imperial soldiers were ordered by the legate to kill all who surrendered, and they complied. One by one, heads began to roll. Anyone who sided with the gangs were beheaded without a trial. As the wolf watched, he could only think of his friends from his youth and the gangs he ran with in the gutters of the Imperial City. These thieves and pickpockets looked out for each other and found themselves on the wrong side of the law by circumstance. Unable to stomach the massacre, he defects illegally that night, marking himself a traitor to the Legion, and sneaks out of the city and begins an aimless journey across the countryside. When he's captured on the border of Skyrim, he initially thinks that his arrest is due to him being a defector. However, both the captured Stormcloaks and local legionnaires assume him to be a Nord of Skyrim. Though only half Nordic, he did inherit his father's features and looked like he belonged in the North Country. Again, he watched the Legion line up their enemies to begin their brutal beheading methods. As he rests his head on the chopping block, he finally accepts that his family curse is inescapable. But a dragon's arrival disrupts his death at the last moment. As he flees Helgen with his new life, he feels both gratitude, but also a great responsibility. He knows deep in his heart that he was fated to die on that block, and wonders why the gods spared him now when they seemed to abandon his family generations ago. He gets his answer very soon when he discovers that he is Dragonborn. Most characters we've written for Skyrim are exceptional in some form and eventually bear the responsibility of saving the world from dragons with some amount of confidence in their abilities. But if you stop and think about it, this is a mortal man going up against not only dragons, but the World Eater himself. Since we've all seen these dragon fights so many times, it's easy to forget the overwhelming odds you are up against. We didn't want to lose sight of that burden for this character and decided to make it a core part of his story. He's a thief turned soldier and skilled at a few things, but nowhere near the demigod level dragonborn many characters are. He is just a man, and an ordinary man can't simply kill a dragon without extraordinary abilities. For this reason, he enters into 3 agreements that come with a high price. These 3 are becoming a werewolf, becoming a nightingale, and bearing the artifact Umbra. We'll talk in depth about how each of these 3 packs shapes his fate and story, but first, let's discuss his questlines and general roleplay approach. The Companions are the first faction he joins. He wants to hone his swordsmanship and also stay occupied while he wrestles with the anxiety of being the Dragonborn of legend. He is willing to try, but the role of hero doesn't feel natural to him. He is uncomfortable by the praise of Jarl Balgruuf and doesn't feel that the praise he's gained in Whiterun is earned. He also doesn't care much for the bravado of his fellow Nords. The Companions talk about honor, but take jobs just as any mercenary would. The Stormcloaks are the worst offenders. In his eyes, they do not know real oppression. They've thrown away peace and have allowed themselves to get talked into a frenzy by Ulfric. Only those who have lived comfortable lives can possibly think that they are justified in starting this civil war. The Imperial Legion is no better though. He knows firsthand how poorly organized and callous they are, and believes they are doomed to fail due to poor leadership. He does complete the Companions questline, and he embraces the Beastblood of Hircine, but they do not remain his primary allied faction. Aella is his only point of contact, as she is the only one left who shares his vision of the usefulness of Beastblood. Together they reclaim the ancient werewolf totems and uncover new powers from Hircine's hunting grounds. His primary allied faction is the Thieves Guild. He is introduced to Brynjolf by way of the main quest and proves himself quickly. He bonds with the thieves of the Ratway, and for the first time since arriving in Skyrim, he feels the weight of his burdens lifted a bit. He smiles for the first time in a while after a successful job and realizes that he has found his new home. He doesn't steal for money necessarily, but rather because it's the one thing in life that makes him feel alive. Just as he did in his youth, he once again finds himself back in the gutters, and this time he understands the gutters are where he belongs. Growing up on the streets helped him learn how to look in someone's eyes and determine if they were genuine. To him, the thieves of the Ratway were as genuine as they come, and he enjoyed their company more than any Jarl's court or any wealthy citizens. During the Thieves Guild questline, he chooses to become a nightingale, and swears an oath to defend the Twilight Sepulchre if needed. As far as soul-binding pacts go, this was an easy choice for him to make. Serve as a guardian for the Daedric Prince of Stealth and Shadow, and gain influence over the shadows themselves in return. Now the third pact is the one with the highest price, when he claims the artifact Umbra. The lore of this cursed sword is interesting. It is said to be a severed splinter of the Daedric Prince Clavicus Vial, and the sword has a will of its own. Over time, it will turn its wielder into shadow, and the carrier essentially becomes nothing more than a host for Umbra. However, the power it grants will allow the Wolf's Shadow to face down dragons and survive their deadly breath. It is by wielding this deadly blade that he is able to defeat Alduin, Harkon, and Miraak. He knows that it will one day corrupt his soul, and he is willing to make that sacrifice, but he fights off his influence as long as he possibly can. In his travels, he is granted a vision of his fate in the hot springs of Eastmarch. Here, his deteriorating mind manifests an artifact from the Shivering Isles, a shadowed mimic of himself, which becomes the Daedric sword Shadowrend once defeated. This shadowed version of himself is all that will be left of him one day. However, he has one saving grace to partially escape the clutches of Umbra: his beast blood. Umbra might claim the man, but it will never claim the wolf. We roleplay that this wolf spirit will live on, bound to Hircine's hunting grounds, and unreachable by Umbra. Because of this, he focuses his energy on mastering his werewolf form and gaining complete control of his inner beast. He is worried about becoming like Sinding of Falkreath, and transitions into werewolf form as often as he can to build up his strength and mastery over his wolf form. He must be ready for the day when the man becomes the shadow and the wolf is released permanently. His basic gameplay loop follows a pattern of infiltration. He moves through the battlefield unseen, pickpocketing the weapons of unsuspecting foes using misdirection. When he finally bursts forth from the shadows, his enemies are woefully unprepared for either the cold steel of his two greatswords or the fierce claws of his beast form. He is at his strongest when he has prep time, and dungeons full of regular men and mer are where he can use these tactics to the greatest effect. When facing down beasts and powerful undead, he relies on the strength of Umbra and its powerful health absorb enchantment to stay alive, being fully embraced by its shadow and accepting that his man form will one day succumb, while his beast form is freed is his only chance to save the world. Alright, let's move into creating the character. He will wear a unique armor combination that we call Armor of the Full Moon, made possible for this build thanks to the Steedstone. He will wear the Vigil Silver Hand boots, gauntlets and helmet, and the Nightingale armor to increase your stamina and frost resistance. It is a leveled set which caps out at level 32, but picking it up anytime after level 19 will give you 30 extra points in stamina and an extra 30% to frost resistance, which we felt was more than sufficient for a Nord. The Vigil Silver Hand boots and gauntlets are used to tie the helmet in and make the whole look more cohesive and natural. You can obtain this armor set during the Creation Club quest Unholy Vigil. Read the letter to Keeper Carset in the Hall of the Vigilance to start the quest. For auxiliary gear, we primarily used the Ring of Hircine for at-will werewolf transformations, useful for quick traversal across the map, in addition to role-playing his control over his beast blood. All of the Frost Moon rings from the Dragonborn DLC should also be obtained and used when the situation calls for them. He will wear an Amulet of Talos for reduced shout cooldown, so his breath shouts can synergize with Shadowrend. For his weapons, he will carry the two greatswords discussed earlier, Umbra and Shadowrend. Umbra absorbs 25 points of health and stamina and soul traps enemies. Because of the soul trap enchantment, he will not use it against mortal souls and instead switch to Shadowrend, for he is not morally evil. This sword makes enemies 15% weaker to magic, and while he is not a mage, his elemental shouts count as destruction spells, and he will use them as often as possible in open combat. In addition to his two swords, he will also carry a Daedric Crossbow. While most Daedric gear is a bit too much, in our opinion, the Daedric Crossbow does a great job at looking sinister without being over the top. It matches his dark, brooding aesthetic perfectly. It has a fantastic base damage of 30 and is actually obtainable right out of the gate. If you don't want to grind up Daedric smithing or wait till vendors sell it at level 46, you can actually steal one from the Fletcher in Solitude. It is in an expert locked display case in the side room behind the counter, and we recommend doing this as soon as possible. Since we aren't focusing on smithing for this build, we will only be using self-crafted iron bolts. For shouts, the Wolf's Shadow will make regular use of offensive shouts in open combat, taking advantage of his Amulet of Talos. Fire Breath, Frost Breath, or Ice Form, and Storm Call are his primary offensive elemental spells that synergize well with Shadowrend's enchantment. He will also frequently use Become Ethereal, Disarm, Unrelenting Force, and Throw Voice. It's super fun to play as a stealthy character that can also function as a powerful warrior, and these shouts help the Wolf's Shadow excel at both. Often we find basic shouts take a backseat in gameplay, but for this character we wanted to use shouts as often as possible. Even a single word of Frost Breath can turn the tide of battle while wielding Shadowrend, especially if the shout is also buffed by a potion of Fortify Destruction. And speaking of alchemy, let's discuss the frequently used brews for the Wolf's Shadow. Elemental shouts count as destruction spells, so he will absolutely use a concoction that we call Spark of Life, which is made from glowing mushroom, wheat, and nightshade. This is a double effect potion that fortifies destruction and health. Up next is Burning Brawn, which is made from Dragon's Tongue and Fly Amanita, and grants you Fortify two-handed and resist fire. This is his primary brew when he switches into open combat, and is especially useful when taking down dragons. His Nord blood gives him natural frost resistance, but dragons frequently have fire breath as well. This potion allows you to get up close and personal without fear when the great beasts land. Finally, we have Huntsman's Draft, a Fortify Marksman and Regenerate health potion made with Canis Root, Namira's Rot, and Juniper Berries mixed in, useful for amping up the damage of his crossbow. These 3 potions were taught to him by wandering travelers who sensed his great burden. Each is a gift to the man who must shoulder the burden of Umbra to save the world. In addition to these 3 named beneficial potions, he can craft all sorts of poisons as well to add even more damage to the back end. These are a couple of our favorites that we roleplay he learned in the Thieves Guild. Mafala's Venom is a basic poison of frenzy made from blisterwort and fly amanita. A Dunmer Drifter taught him this recipe, encouraging him to reverse pickpocket it to start lethal conflicts between 2 unsuspecting souls. And last of all, we have Venom of the Funnel Web, which is a poison of damage, health, and paralysis made from Canis Root, Impstool, and Deathbell. It's a great poison to tip your crossbow bolts with, or reverse pickpocket to put enemies out of commission while you stealthily move through the battlefield. Though the process of distilling this venom is unpleasant, the Wolf's Shadow agrees with the Bosmer who taught him that its potency is the stuff of legends. Alright, let's move on to stats and perk spread. We chose to level the Wolf's Shadow with a ratio of 2 health to 1 stamina, and as mentioned previously, we will be using the Steed Stone for armor negation. This will allow the Wolf's Shadow to wear heavy armor parts that up the aesthetic points by 100, while still being able to move unseen and unheard. Finally, we are playing as a Nord, primarily for roleplay reasons, as a grizzled Nord fits this build perfectly. Battle Cry will also be used in his special moves section, and the plus 10 to two-handed right out of the gate is also quite nice. By the time you reach level 40, you'll want the following perks. In two-handed, take all 5 in Barbarian, Champion Stance, Great Critical Charge, Devastating Blow, and Sweep. In Sneak, take all 5 in Stealth, Muffled Movement, Lightfoot, Silent Roll, Silence, and Shadow Warrior. We didn't take the right side of the tree here because we wanted to avoid relying on stealth archery and dagger kills. He sets up combat situations from the shadows, then bursts forth into battle. In Pickpocket, take all 5 in Light Fingers, Night Thief, Poisoned, Cut Purse, and Misdirection. We chose to stop there as while pickpocketing armor is super fun, it's hard to roleplay your character removing someone's armor without them noticing unless they were, say, some sort of magician. In Alchemy, we will be taking all 5 in Alchemist, Physician, and Poisoner, just enough to get more powerful poisons to slip into pockets. Finally, in Archery, take 3 in Overdraw, Eagle Eye, and 1 in Steady Hand. If you plan to play past level 40, you can further flesh out the archery and alchemy trees for a more powerful crossbow and quality of life enhancements for brewing potions. You could also invest a few perks into the illusion tree to get quiet casting for silent shouts. Additional perks you'll want to seek out are Sindarian Serendipity for a chance to create duplicate poisons and potions. Hunting down all the Crimson Nirnroot takes a bit of time, but it's totally worth it. Secret of Strength, a black book ability from Filament and Filigree which grants unlimited power attacks for 30 seconds, necessary for another one of the Wolf's Shadow's special moves. Mora's Boon, a black book ability from the Hidden Twilight that instantly replenishes your health, stamina, and magicka, useful when you find yourself outnumbered in sticky situations. Seeker of Shadows, a black book ability which increases your stealth abilities by 10%, along with a very useful 10% improved alchemy for even more potent poisons and potions. Finally, Agent of Stealth, which is the Crescent Moon ability from Nocturnal that we will work into his special moves. And now it's time to jump into our favorite part of every build, the special moves. His first special move is called Hircine's Gambit, performed by using the Nord racial ability Battle Cry and Secret of Strength. Secret of Strength will allow you unlimited stamina for 30 seconds, letting you chase down your fleeing foes at ease in a ritual hunt, remaining in man form. Up next is Shadow and Beast, which is the combination of Misdirection and Werewolf form. Using the Misdirection perk, he quietly moves through the shadows and pickpockets the weapons off of each enemy. With each blade removed, he unleashes the wolf and tears through a dungeon of completely unprepared foes. Finally, we have Shadow Storm, which is the combination of Stormcall, Agent of Stealth, and Huntsman's Draft. Use the power of the Thu'um to conjure a torrential downpour, and use the blessing of Nocturnal to pass unseen through the rain and fog at will. With this move, he can slip through the battlefield, unleashing deadly shots from within the torrent. And with the special moves completed, we are ready to wrap up the Wolf's Shadow. This was a fun playthrough for us. We love characters who are comfortable in both stealth and open combat, and we really wanted to write a story centered around the sword Umbra. If you decide to give it a try, let us know in the comments how it goes. As always, thank you so much for supporting us by watching our videos. If you like what we do, we have many more builds planned, so be sure to like and subscribe to keep the magic of Skyrim alive. We'll see you next time, right here on Skypothesis.